Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 858. I had the white pieces and start off at c4, the English opening. My opponent goes e6, which is one of the respectable ways to play against it. I'm going to go with knight c3. The opening book always has these lines with d4 transposing into a queen's pawn opening of some kind or another. But this is just a main way of continuing with the English. Let's see, he goes knight f6, and I go g3. So g3, you can see, is actually pretty far down the popularity list at this point. d4, once again, transposes into a queen's pawn game, probably a Nimzo Indian. Knight f3 is still leaving both options open, and g3 is sort of committal. I just wanted to explore for a little bit this other line with e4. It's kind of an interesting way to play. It looks like, Black is setting up for d5, and White is, trying to act against that. But after Black plays d5, I guess there's not a whole lot of percentage in taking here. You could end up with a ram structure with the two d pawns locked against each other. So the interesting line here is pushing on with e5, and then Black pushes on with d4. So I guess this has been played many times. I don't know if I've seen this myself. And so everybody takes the knights off, and then at this point White chooses to take this pawn. I guess that's the more accurate move here, and then continues with either knight f3 or d4. Actually, if White could get both knight f3 and d4 in, knight f3 and d4, and then I would put a pretty good lock on the e5 square there. But I don't know if that's going to happen. Seems like Black might take that opportunity to get the e5 move in. But the point is, if you do get both those moves in, then you have a lock on this pawn, and this bishop is going to take a while to develop. Maybe it'll come out to the g file here. Anyway, this position is favorable to White, but not a huge advantage. But it has been played with pretty good success by the White player. So maybe I'll try that next time. It looked kind of interesting. There are other ways to go, so it's not all straight sailing after you play e5 here, but it is seems like e4. Not all smooth sailing after you play e4 here, but it does seem like kind of an interesting line. Maybe I'll try it next time I'm in this position. Anyway, I continued with g3, which leads to my typical setup, and Black can continue with c5. We get a symmetrical English of some kind, or d5, which I thought would be kind of the logical way. Did I take a look at that? Yeah, I didn't. Oh, well, it's coming up later. I was kind of expecting him to get that d5 move in at some point, and he never really did. But he went with bishop b4. So this is like a Nimzo Indian with these two pieces out and the pawn on e6. And it is a respectable way to play against the English. Looking at this with the chess engine, it seems like, even though we're in a rare line in the opening book, it seems like Black is still doing okay here. I could play with d4, but I'm continuing with bishop g2, staying in English territory, and then he took. I think it's pretty rare to take here, so let's check out this line. Yeah, I was expecting something like this. He would castle, I would develop, say, knight f3, and then he would play d5. And this bishop is serving to put some pressure on the knight, and maybe this will be a threat if I push on with the d pawn. It opens up. Well, I could play d4 there, I guess. Anyway, that's kind of what I was expecting. I would probably have taken there, but he went with bishop takes. We're just out of the opening book, and there was no real rush to do that. He could have waited for me to play. I think in that position, after d5, maybe one move is to play a3 to kick that bishop and ask it what it's going to do there. So, that's often what the Black player wants to do. He puts his bishop out here and then waits for White to make some sort of move that's aimed at that bishop, and then he decides whether to trade it off or retreat it. But you want to extract some kind of concession from your opponent before giving up that good bishop. Anyway, he did get the doubled pawns here, so this is not a particularly bad position for Black. I just think he could have played it better. So I eventually decided to play knight f3 here. I think this is okay. He castled, I castled. I castled. And then he went to d5. So he did finally get that d5 move, and I decided to trade it off at this point. And then I went with d3 with the idea of playing a later e4. But we'll come back to this e4 move because the chess engine, well, it didn't mind d3. It thought this was interesting. An okay move in this position. I mean, it's a flexible move. It could support c4 as well as e4. And it's just keeping control of these squares. So I have a very solid position here. Black has more space, a bit of an unusual twist, but I have good lines for my pieces, and maybe I can go after these center pawns and put a rook on the open file. Should be fine here. Let's see, he continued with bishop to g4. I went with rook e1, just continuing with my plan of playing e4. He went knight bd7, and here I went with e4. So the chess engine does not approve. It thinks white is actually doing pretty well at this point, and e4 gives a lot of that advantage away. So I could go with h3. This is a suggestion, and it thinks that black should trade off that knight. I guess that knight's a pretty good piece here, and then try and oppose on the e-file with the rook. Then maybe queen c2. Queen could come out here to a5, and bishop to d2, and it again gives an advantage to white here. I mean, not an overwhelming advantage, but it likes this better than the line that I played, which it thinks is basically even. And it's even here, it doesn't really want to play e4. It just wants to play with the pieces and keeping this pawn structure somewhat like this. So interesting. But yeah, I'm usually looking to play actively in the center, and so I'm pushing forward with e4. He takes, I take. And here, I guess, at some point I began to realize there is a slight deficit to the way I played, which is I have created these pawn weaknesses. But on the other hand, I have more center influence, and I have good squares for my pieces. So it's about even. The weaknesses are compensated by those strengths that I mentioned, the open lines and the pieces. So he goes rook e8. He's just got a target here, and he's going to pile up on that e-pawn. This is a reasonable way to play. I need to plan out how I'm going to defend it. I start with queen c2. He goes knight c5, attacking it. The chess engine really thinks he should just take off this knight at this point, and then play knight c5. It didn't have a problem with that move. It thinks that's a good square for the knight. It just thinks that he should get rid of my knight on f3 while he has the chance. Kind of interesting play. And then one idea of this knight c5 move is if I play a move like bishop a3, not the only move in this position, but something I would certainly think about, trying to harass this knight here, which is undefended. It follows up with queen to d3 with the idea, well, I can't take the knight because my queen is hanging, and if I take the queen, the knight comes in here, and maybe it gets around to a good square after I chase it. It could come back to this square, for example. So interesting play, and it thinks that black is about even there. So knight c5, maybe not the best, but seems like very logical play to me. I went knight d4. So that's why the chess engine didn't like this immediate knight c5 move. It really wanted to get rid of this knight before it had a chance to get to the d4 square. Anyway, played rook c8. Not the most active move here. I'm not quite sure what his plan was. Maybe he's planning this kind of slow way of bringing the rook over and piling up more pressure on here, but I don't think there's really time for that. Anyway, I bring my bishop out, pinning his knight. He plays h6, and now I took. Chess engine doesn't like that. It would actually just retreat the bishop here. You know, it's always a question. You have the bishop pair, and it's going to be valuable in the endgame. I do also have these open lines for the bishop, so it's probably good from that point of view. But you know, it's always a question whether you want to do that or whether you want to trade off this knight, which is putting pressure on the center here. Let's see. It would continue with something like a bishop to h5, f4. It thinks white is doing well. The chess engine thinks white is doing well in this position, and I like it too for white. I got a big pawn center here, and pressure on the on the e-pawn still seems to be manageable. I guess I can even think of pushing on to e5 if it after I've gotten in that f4 move, e5 becomes a realistic option to kind of deal with the pressure on the e-pawn. Okay, but I didn't play that way. I decided to take, after thinking about it for some time. He takes back with the queen, Then I went to h3, kicking his bishop back. So he dropped all the way back to d7. I think coming back here was also reasonable, but and there's nothing especially wrong with this move. And I played my king up to just hold on to these pawns and prepare to push that f-pawn forward. And now this is really the first mistake of the game. I mean, there were some inaccuracies where the game went from being, a slight edge to white to basically even. But this one gives white a pretty big edge because of the move f4. I mean, it's just a natural move. And then here, by far, the best move is to just drop the rook back. So basically, he gave me a couple of free moves there. And so it's a good position for white, probably the best in the game. But maybe not, it's not clear if this is still winning. I mean, it's still in the balance here, I guess. But a good position for white. Anyway, he went rook to h5, and this just loses. There's no way this rook is coming back alive from this journey. It's a kind of understandable mistake. I've often tried to play this way, play actively with my rooks, particularly after I've seen a game by, well, Aronian was famous for playing games where he got an active rook and was doing crazy stuff with the rook in the middle game. But it requires really accurate calculation. You really have to understand how many moves ahead, how that rook is going to escape from the side of the board, or if it is going to be taken. A lot of times Aronian would end up sacking the exchange, but getting some compensation for it. And so that was the kind of sequence he would plan out. But it is a very risky way to play, and you have to be able to calculate it out. And in this case, it's just not going to work out to black's advantage. The move I played, queen to e2, was one of the top engine choices, but it wasn't the top choice. The best way to exploit this, according to the chess engine, is to push the pawns. I didn't actually think about this idea. It's not immediately winning the rook, but it's gaining something else. So the queen gets kicked around, and then you can actually push on with f5 here. The knight and the queen are both supporting that, so even though it's under fire from the rook and the bishop, it's well supported on that square. So the queen comes back, and then e6. So before he has a chance to take that, and you push on with the e-pawn. And now after this exchange, once again, this pawn is well supported by the knight and the rook. So the fact that he has two pieces attacking it is not sufficient. So the bishop has to drop back, and only one square. And then bishop f3 finally traps the rook. So that's the way the chess engine gets the most mileage out of this position. And it's a pretty nice way to play now that I've seen it. I didn't think of this idea of pushing that pawn forward and kicking the bishop out of the way. I eventually used a pawn to shield this diagonal so I could harass the rook. My first instinct at this point was to play here. That was maybe what I was thinking, trying to attack that rook. But of course he's got bishop and rook on the h3 square, so I have to deal with that. So I started with the move queen e2. Like I said, this was one of the top choices and is still winning. It's like a +2, but the other one was slightly more accurate. Okay, so he goes queen g6. Now I push on with f5. This is good. This was a top choice. And he chooses to sacrifice here. I was kind of expecting this move, queen g5, which the chess engine affirms is the best move. And then I just played bishop f3, and now he is losing the exchange. So I get the exchange. It's similar to the other line, except his bishop is a little more active. I haven't got that passed pawn, but similar ideas. But that's the best that black can do in this position. After taking, he's just down a piece. And then it just does not get any better because his rook still doesn't have anywhere to go. Let's see, he tried bringing his knight in, but this just gives up another piece and doesn't solve the problem with the rook. Let's see, he brought the rook over here to pin the bishop. That was probably his idea. So I unpin, played queen f6. I go bishop f3, attacking the rook, and then he kind of impulsively moved the rook. I guess he'd been thinking a while and was starting to hurry through his moves, but it's hopeless anyway. This is the sequence I was expecting, which is best play according to the chess engine. Thought he would just take here. and then play g6. That at least will get some material for the rook. I would probably go ahead and grab the rook here, and then, but you can see he's sacrificed so much. I have a rook and a knight in addition to my queen against his queen, and I don't have a reasonable number of pawns here. In fact, the pawns are, he has one extra pawn, but anyway, plenty of play for the end game here if if I can't manage to mate him with the extra rook and knight. So that's how it should have ended, but he just played rook g5, so I went ahead and grabbed this rook too, and he resigned. Anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.